You want to know the real tragedy? It wasn't burying my mother. It was hearing my aunt whisper at the funeral, Margaret never had love for her daughter, only for her golden boy. And no one, not even my own father, said a word to defend me. That's when my 10-year-old son stood up, held out an envelope, and shattered 30 years of silence in one sentence. This isn't just a story. It's the truth we don't talk about until we can't hold it in any longer. You're watching Revenge Her Way. And this is how I found out my mother did love me after she was already gone. The church smelled like lemon polish and old roses. Everything about it felt like my mother. Neat, understated, and cold. There were no elaborate flower arrangements, no music, no slideshow of memories. Just stiff pews, whispered condolences, and a silence too thick to cut through. My mother, Margaret Meyers, had always preferred things simple. She died the way she lived, quietly, without asking much of anyone. I sat in the third row with my son Eli, his small fingers curled into mine. He was 10, fidgeting, confused, trying to understand the grief hanging in the air like smoke. My brother Logan, of course, was front and center. Tall, composed, with that natural charisma that always made people lean in. He adjusted his tie, then stood, ready to deliver the kind of eulogy that would get nods and polite tears. She called me her anchor, he began, voice catching just enough to seem sincere. She used to say, Logan, you're the reason I kept going when things got hard. There were a few muffled sobs. Some people dabbed at their eyes. I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling the weight of words that were never mine to carry. He went on, painting her as the pillar of the family, the guiding light, the heart of the home, and all I could think about was how none of it ever applied to me. Then my aunt leaned over to my cousin beside her and said, not quite in a whisper, Margaret never had the patience for girls. You know how she was. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slightly, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up. But no one did. Not my father, who stared blankly at the floor like he hadn't heard a thing. Not Logan, who just kept nodding, letting her memory be shaped without me in it. Not a single person said, that's not true. I felt it then. Not grief. Not loss. Erasure. That was the moment I realized I was the ghost at my own mother's funeral. I squeezed Eli's hand a little tighter, trying to hold myself together. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry today. Not for her. Not for them. But Eli, in the way only children can, sensed it. He looked up at me with those wide, serious eyes, then reached into the pocket of his navy coat. I found this in Grandma's desk this morning, he whispered. She said only you could open it. Before I could stop him, he stood. The room fell into a hush. Eli walked down the narrow aisle, each step echoing against the walls. He stopped in front of the casket, then turned to face everyone, this room full of people who had spoken about my mother as if I had never existed. He held up the envelope, his voice shaking but clear. Then why did Grandma say only Mommy could open this? It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from sadness, but from shame. A silence that strips the air of oxygen and leaves only the truth behind. All eyes shifted from him to me. I stood slowly, unsure if my legs would carry me, my hands suddenly cold. I took the envelope from his fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. Neat, exacting, the way she signed every school permission slip when I was a child, the way she labeled her spice jars, the way she lived. To Rachel, it said. Just that. I hadn't opened it yet, hadn't even broken the seal, but in that moment, something cracked open inside me. For the first time in my life, they looked at me not as the extra, the emotional one, the daughter who never quite fit, but as someone who had been chosen. The story they had written about me was starting to change, and it started with the quietest voice in the room. I sat back down, the envelope heavy in my hands like it carried more than paper. Eli slid closer, watching me with that quiet intensity kids have when they know something big is about to happen. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The room was dead silent. No one whispered now. No one dared. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper, folded neatly in thirds. Her handwriting, so familiar, so deliberate, sprawled across the page. I took a breath, then read aloud, "If you're reading this, then I wasn't brave enough to say these words when I was alive. I felt my throat close up, but I kept going. I know I didn't make it easy for you. I know you probably spent years wondering what you did wrong, why I couldn't love you the way you needed me to. The truth is, I didn't know how. A few people shifted in their seats. Logan looked up from his phone. My aunt clutched her purse tighter. You were everything I never knew how to be, and that terrified me. I stopped there, just for a second, long enough to feel the impact settle over the room like dust. I glanced around, at my father who suddenly looked 20 years older, at Logan whose smug certainty had finally cracked, at my cousins who avoided my eyes. This wasn't part of the script they had rehearsed. I continued. You felt things too deeply. You asked too many questions. You wanted more than what I knew how to give. And instead of trying to learn from you, I pulled away. That wasn't your fault. That was mine. My hands shook, but I held the paper steady. I had waited my whole life to hear something like this. And now that it was here, I didn't want to miss a word. I spent years thinking I was protecting you by being distant. I told myself it was strength. But now I see it was fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of opening up a part of me I'd buried a long time ago. I paused again, this time because I had to. My eyes burned. My heart pounded. Then I felt something shift in the envelope. I reached inside again and pulled out a small brass key. Attached to it was a tiny tag, handwritten in the same cursive. For Rachel. Top drawer, back of the jewelry box. It was so specific, so intentional, that I could feel the breath catch in my chest. I looked at Eli. He nodded like he knew exactly what I needed. I looked back at the letter. There was one final line. There are things I couldn't say face to face, but I left them behind for you to find. When you're ready, open the drawer. I folded the letter carefully, hands still trembling. No one said anything. Not a single person. Not even Logan. Because they knew. They knew something had broken. Something they couldn't tape back together with stories about how things had always been. I didn't cry often. Years of silence had trained me to smile through heartbreak. But right then, I felt a tear trace down my cheek. And I wasn't ashamed of it. I wasn't ashamed of crying. I was ashamed of how long it had taken for her to say this. I held the key in one hand, the letter in the other, and for the first time in my life I realized I had been seen. Not as the daughter who always asked too much. Not as the emotional one, the burden, the outsider. But as the woman she couldn't admit she admired. Until now. And somehow, even from the grave, my mother had finally found her voice. The next chapter was waiting, and I was ready to unlock it. I waited until everyone had gone. The house was quiet again, returned to its familiar state, walls that echoed nothing but expectation, and air that still carried her scent. Lavender and old furniture, faint but stubborn. Eli was asleep on the couch, curled up with his coat still on. I covered him with a blanket, kissed the top of his head, then made my way upstairs. The hallway hadn't changed in decades. The carpet still creaked in the same places. The wallpaper still curled at the corners, pale blue with tiny flowers that always reminded me of something she once said. Quiet patterns are more respectable. Her bedroom door was closed, like always. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was cooler in here. Still, preserved. The bed was perfectly made, her robe draped neatly over the back of the chair. The same alarm clock sat ticking on the nightstand, blinking 8:15, as if time itself had gotten stuck the moment she left. I walked over to the dresser. The top drawer stuck a little, just like it used to when I was a kid and thought her jewelry was treasure. I reached to the back, where I remembered she kept things she didn't want found. And there it was, a small cherrywood box, polished but worn at the edges. I lifted it out gently. It was heavier than I expected. The brass key slid in easily, and with a soft click, the lid opened. Inside was a single, leather-bound journal. Thick, the spine soft from use, edges of pages curling with age. There were ribbons tucked between entries, little bookmarks of moments she thought mattered. I sat down on her bed, fingers brushing over the cover like I was touching a ghost. Then I opened it. March 12th, 1993. She wore blue. She was shaking. I wanted to run up and hold her, but I froze. Why didn't I say I was proud? I stopped breathing. I remembered that day. I was 9. It was my first solo in the school choir. I had practiced for weeks, but when I looked for her in the audience, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't clapping louder than anyone else. She just sat there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I thought she hadn't cared. But she did. She just didn't know how to show it. I flipped the page. June 7th, 1996. Rachel didn't come home after school. She was sitting at the lake alone. I didn't ask why. I just told her to get inside. She looked at me like I'd failed her. I think I did. Another page, January 3rd, 2001. She left for college today. She didn't cry. I didn't either. I wanted to her. I didn't. I told her to be careful. She didn't look back. Each entry was a crack in the armor she had worn so tightly her whole life. Each page was a memory I thought I had misread, replayed in a new light. I wasn't invisible. She had been watching. Always. Quietly. Fearfully. But she had been there. I had spent years believing she didn't see me, didn't value me, didn't love me, but she had been writing me a love letter. She just didn't mail it. I kept reading. The pages smelled faintly of lavender. Her handwriting varied, some lines rushed, others careful, like she was fighting with herself on how much to say. She had written down my whole life. The scraped knees, the awards, the heartbreaks, even Eli's birth. She never said these things out loud, but here they were. Proof that she had been paying attention. That she had been proud. That her silence wasn't absence. It was fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Of opening wounds she didn't know how to mend. But in this book, her voice was finally loud enough to reach me. And I sat in the dim light of her bedroom, journal on my lap, tears slipping down my face, realizing I hadn't just found her thoughts. I had found her heart. Growing up, I was always told I was too much. Too sensitive. Too dramatic. I cried when my goldfish died. I wrote long birthday cards filled with feelings no one read. I asked questions at the dinner table no one wanted to answer. My mother would sigh and say, "Rachel, not everything needs to be a scene." Meanwhile, Logan could crash his bike into a neighbor's fence and be told he was adventurous. He could forget chores, raise his voice, roll his eyes, and still, my mother would smile and call him her little firecracker. Me? I was the storm. Too loud in the wrong ways, too soft in the wrong places. I learned early how to shrink, how to turn apologies into reflexes, how to fold emotions into silence. When I was 17, I packed my entire life into 2 suitcases. I had been accepted to a small college in Oregon, 800 miles from home, and I didn't look back. I remember standing by the door with my keys in one hand, my acceptance letter in the other. My mother stood in the kitchen, wiping down the counter that didn't need cleaning. She didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She said, "Don't forget your insurance papers." And that was it. No send-off. No proud smile. Just another transaction in the long list of things she didn't say. I drove myself away, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror, waiting for some kind of regret to hit. It never did. But nothing hurt more than the day I lost my husband. It was a rainy Thursday. I remember because Eli had just turned 1 the week before. The phone rang while I was folding laundry. A wreck. Instant. Gone. I called my mother because I didn't know who else to call. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her. My voice broke on the word accident. She was quiet. Then she said, "You'll manage. You always do." And maybe she meant it as encouragement. Maybe in her own way, that was faith in me. But it felt like a dismissal. Like she was handing me strength like a burden and telling me not to complain. I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor, holding Eli, trying not to fall apart. I didn't cry in front of her at the funeral. I didn't ask for help. I didn't scream or rage or fall to pieces. Because somewhere along the line, I had learned that being strong meant being silent. And I wore that silence like armor. It wasn't until I read her journal that I understood. She hadn't said more because she didn't know how. She had watched her own mother bury every emotion, tuck away every pain. Strength to her was endurance. Stoicism, survival. She thought if she taught me the same, I'd never be broken. But she never realized I was already breaking from the inside out. There was one entry, dated 2 days after my husband's death. Rachel called today, said Tom's gone. Her voice cracked and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to drive to her. I should have. I should have held her, but I didn't. I froze. Again. That line sat on the page like a confession, and I cried when I read it. Not because it changed what had happened, not because it erased the years I felt alone, but because I finally understood. For years, I thought her silence was punishment. Turns out, it was protection, warped but rooted in fear. She didn't fail to love me. She just never learned how to love out loud. The morning after the funeral, the house felt strangely alive. Not in a warm, comforting way, but like it was holding its breath. People moved slowly, avoiding eye contact, speaking in softened voices that didn't quite reach me. I had spent the night reading the journal, page after page, trying to stitch together a woman I thought I had already buried. By the time everyone gathered around the long dining table for what passed as a post-funeral meal, lukewarm casseroles, dry ham, too much store-bought pie, I had already decided what I needed to do. I brought the journal with me. It sat on the table like a quiet witness. No one asked what it was. They just watched it like it might burst open on its own. Halfway through the meal, Eli tugged at my sleeve. "Are you going to read it?" he whispered. I nodded. I waited until the room had sunk into one of those awkward silences, forks scraping plates, someone coughing in the distance. Then I opened the journal and found the page I had bookmarked in the early hours of the morning, November 12th, 2019. I cleared my throat, then read aloud. Eli's birthday today. Rachel looked tired but glowing. I didn't say it then, but she's the kind of mother I never was brave enough to be. The room went still. No one moved. No one chewed. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on the page, steadying my voice. I used to think softness made her weak. But I was wrong. She's fierce in ways I never understood. She listens, she bends, she shows up. I never told her how proud I was, but maybe someday she'll know. I closed the journal slowly. When I finally looked up, I saw it. My father's eyes, wide and damp, my aunt's lips pressed tightly together, the corners trembling, and Logan just stared. Then he asked quietly, "Why didn't she ever tell me she wrote all this?" I didn't hesitate, maybe because she knew only one of us needed to hear it to survive. The words hit harder than I expected. Not sharp, not cruel, just honest. He didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or smirk or deflect with a joke. He just nodded once, like something had finally cracked open inside him. That was the first time Logan didn't have a comeback. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward. It was real. It was the sound of a story unraveling, truth finally stepping into the room where denial had lived too long. No one praised me, no one apologized, but no one doubted me anymore either. I didn't need their validation. I had her words, her actual words. She had seen me. She had known who I was. She had written it down, and in doing so, she had rewritten everything. The girl who had once stood alone on a choir stage, desperate for her mother's approval. The woman who had buried her husband and raised a child in the quiet. The daughter who had been told she was too much. She was now the only one in the room with the full truth. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. It's been a few weeks since the funeral. The house is quiet again, but in a different way now. Not empty, just calm, like something has settled that had been trembling for years. The journal sits on my nightstand. Some nights I read a single page. Other nights I let myself get lost in it for hours. It's no longer just her story. It's the bridge between who she was and who I'm becoming. And now I've started my own. Each night after I tuck Eli in, I sit down with a small notebook. Nothing fancy, just a lined journal I picked up at the grocery store, and I write him a few lines, not essays, not life lessons, just pieces of his day through my eyes. Today you helped Mia with her backpack. You are kind. You are seen. You stood up for your classmate when no one else did. That's what courage looks like. I don't write because I expect to leave early. I write because I never want my son to wonder what I felt for him. He saw the journal once, sitting open on my bed. He ran his fingers over the page, then looked at me with serious eyes. "Will I ever be like Grandma?" he asked. I smiled. "Only in one way," I said. "I hope you love someone the way she tried to love me. He didn't ask what I meant. He just hugged me tight. Sometimes kids understand things better than we do. That night, as I turned off the light and watched him drift off to sleep, I realized something. My mother didn't fail. She just didn't finish her story in time. I will. The legacy I'm building for Eli isn't one of silence. It's one of words, of truth, of being seen. I want him to grow up knowing that emotion isn't weakness, that vulnerability isn't something to be ashamed of, that love isn't something you earn, it's something you give. The truth is, we're all writing something every day, whether we mean to or not. The way we show up, the way we stay quiet, the way we say sorry or don't, the way we hug our kids, the way we avoid or embrace. My mother's story was written in fragments and fear, but it ended in honesty. And that changed everything. So if you're listening to this and carrying the weight of words never said, I hope you find the courage to write your own ending. Or better yet, your beginning. Thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to a story that's taken me a lifetime to understand. If this moved you, if it reminded you of someone, or if you saw a part of yourself in it, stay with us. Subscribe to Revenge Her Way for more stories that heal, that challenge, and that remind you. You are not invisible. You are not unread. You are seen. And your story matters. I'll see you in the next one.